In the very near future, you're going to see your neighbour get foreclosed on, and it won't be because they were reckless with money or made some terrible mistake. It's because they bought into the same massive deception we've all been fed for the past 4 years. In fact, at this very moment, a $12 trillion time bomb is quietly ticking away at the heart of the US property market, and the fuse has already been lit. I'm about to give you a number that should absolutely keep you up at night. 67%. For the typical American, that's the portion of their entire wealth tied up in their house. Just one single asset, that's the definition of putting all your eggs in one basket. And that very basket is teetering on the edge of a financial abyss. Over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to pull back the curtain on something the mainstream media will never show you. It's not some hidden conspiracy, it's because the truth is hiding in plain sight. This exact scenario has repeated itself 3 times over the last 100 years, and we are watching it unfold again, move for move. In just a 6-month window, the Treasury quietly took on $2 to $3 trillion in toxic mortgage-backed securities. In the third quarter of 2024, JPMorgan Chase dumped 40% of its entire portfolio of residential mortgages. Then came November, when Deutsche Bank slipped out an announcement about $1 to $2 billion in losses directly linked to real estate derivatives. Folks, these are not coincidences. This is a coordinated retreat. The insiders have already cashed out, leaving the rest of us to deal with the fallout. Before this video ends, you are going to understand precisely how this entire system is engineered. You'll be able to identify the exact phase of the cycle we're in right now, and you'll grasp why 40 million people, and that could include you, are on the brink of a horrifying realization that their most valuable possession is actually their greatest financial risk. So let's break down the mechanics of the trap. Every single market meltdown follows an identical playbook. I've named it the leverage ladder. It has 4 distinct phases, and they always occur in the exact same order, without fail. Phase 1 is what I call the foundation. This is the part where the illusion of wealth is everywhere. You see the value of assets just going up month after month. Getting a loan is as easy as turning on a faucet. Your neighbour pulls equity out of his home to get a new boat. Your cousin with a 590 credit score somehow qualifies for a $400,000 home loan. And no one bats an eye because it feels like everybody is making money. Between 2021 and 2022, American mortgage debt exploded by $2.1 trillion. That isn't organic growth. That is pure leverage. It's optimism bought on credit. But the problem with optimism bought on credit is that the lender always comes to collect. And that brings us to phase 2. The trap is set. Now this is where things get really fascinating. On the surface, the party is still going strong. The average person sees prices continuing to climb. But if you're paying attention to the right signals, you can spot the insiders quietly slipping out the back door. Just look at the SEC filings from the final quarter of 2024. You'll find that the CEOs from the 12 biggest mortgage companies in the country sold off $487 million of their own shares. This isn't about portfolio diversification or planning for retirement. This is a fire sale. They're looking at the exact same public data that you can. The only difference is they understand its true meaning. Interest rates are soaring, yet home values haven't come down to match. That massive discrepancy is the trap. Imagine a pair of scissors. As the blades open wider and wider, your financial neck is positioned right between them. Phase 3 is the trigger. Some part of the system snaps, and it's never the obvious thing everyone is focused on. Back in 2008, the problem was subprime mortgages, a slice of the market so seemingly insignificant that Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke himself claimed the issue was contained. Go back to 19 to 29 and it was margin debt, something no one believed could possibly bring down the whole economy. The trigger is invariably something the so-called experts write off. They'll say it's too small to matter or too isolated to cause contagion. Then in the blink of an eye, it becomes the only thing that does, which leads to phase 4, the cascade. Margin calls get triggered, and all the available money, the liquidity, simply evaporates as if it was never there. Suddenly the value of your home has nothing to do with that Zillow estimate anymore. Okay, and this is where the story gets really insane. This isn't some academic theory. This precise chain of events has unfolded 3 separate times in recent history. And on each occasion, millions of people were left standing in the wreckage saying, "I never thought it could happen to me. Let me prove it to you." We all know the story of the 1929 stock market crash. We've heard about Black Tuesday and the images of bankers leaping from buildings, and we've seen the pictures of bread lines that snaked around entire city blocks.
Absolutely.
But I'm going to tell you the part that your history books conveniently left out of all. That crash didn't begin on Wall Street. Its roots go back to the Florida real estate bubble 3 full years earlier in 1926. Just imagine it. It's the mid-1920s in Miami. Speculation on land has reached a level of pure mania. You have people purchasing parcels of swampland without ever laying eyes on them. Developers are running ads in newspapers offloading what they call prime beachfront lots to eager buyers in places like New York and Chicago who have never even set foot in the state of Florida. The hustle was genius in its simplicity. You drop 10% on some land and pass it off to the next guy looking to get rich quick before your next payment could even hit. Everybody was getting paid, and in a boom like that, everyone thinks they're a financial wizard. But then September 1926 rolls around. A monster Category 4 hurricane hammers Miami. And for the first time, people decide to actually go see the property they own, and they find out something. Pretty inconvenient. A huge chunk of it is underwater, and not from the storm. No, it was always a swamp, but that's all it ever was. And just like that, the floor drops out of the market. In a single night, $1 billion of real estate wealth just vanished. And remember, we're talking 1926 money. That's the equivalent of $18 billion today. Poof, gone. But this is the critical piece of the puzzle. No one put it all together. The consensus was, that's just a Florida thing, a local issue. The rest of the country is solid. Here's the secret, it wasn't solid at all. See, small-town banks all over America were funding those bogus Florida land deals. Once that land was worth zero, those banks started to go under. By 1929, more than 600 banks had already gone belly up. This was before the infamous stock market crash, before the widespread panic set in. The big crash happened on what we call Black Tuesday. But that crash wasn't the disease that caused the Great Depression. It was just the most obvious symptom. The bad real estate debt had already infected the entire financial system like a toxin flowing through the veins. The market collapse was simply the moment everyone looked down and realized the patient was bleeding out. And this next part, this is what should really give you chills. Back in 1928, a whole year before the crash, the rich insiders were already getting out. JPMorgan himself quietly shipped $60 million in gold over to European banks in the spring of that year. The Rockefellers. They were silently converting their assets into safe government bonds. Trust me, they knew what was on the horizon. But the typical family, they didn't get wiped out in 1929. No, their nightmare began in 1933, a full 4 years down the road. Why? Because the banks started demanding full mortgage payments ahead of schedule. Not because people missed a payment, it was because the banks themselves were desperate for cash to stay afloat. Your home wasn't your safe haven. It was the bank's escape hatch. Think about that. Millions of families who never missed a single payment lost their homes. Their security, everything. The system broke and they were just caught in the wreckage.
I know we missed the last
forward
payment.
6 decades.
Please.
The year is 1986. Reagan's in the White House, the economy is roaring and Wall Street is making a killing. Meanwhile, 747 banks are on the verge of ceasing to exist. This was the savings and loan crisis, the financial meltdown that's been forgotten mostly because it was a slow burn. It was like a silent killer creeping up on the economy. You don't even realize there's a problem until it's far too late. So let me break down how it all went down. In the early 1980s, a decision came down from Congress to loosen the rules on savings and loan institutions. Now, these were your local neighborhood banks. They handled mortgages, savings accounts, you know, the boring, dependable stuff. But overnight, they stopped being boring. The new regulations meant they could now dive into high-stakes commercial real estate lending, and they dove in headfirst completely off the deep end. In Texas, for example, these S&Ls were funding massive empty office complexes. We're talking buildings with not a single tenant. It was pure gambling. By 1985, the vacancy rate for commercial properties in the Southwest had skyrocketed to 30%. Picture this, 3 out of every 10 of those big office buildings were total ghost towns.
Good.
And this is the part that should make your blood boil.
It coming.
As early as 1984, the feds were fully aware of the situation. The Federal Home Loan Bank Board had documents, internal memos proving that almost 500 S&Ls were basically broke. They were insolvent. Zombie institutions dead on their feet but still operating. But what did the regulators do? They hid the evidence. They didn't want to cause a panic in the markets. Their plan was to handle it behind the scenes, letting these filling banks die a quiet death one by one to avoid a full-blown meltdown. And that genius plan worked perfectly. right up until the moment it catastrophically failed. When it all came crashing down in 1989, the American taxpayer was left with a $132 billion bill to clean up the mess. But here's the detail you won't find in your standard history lesson. More than 1,000 S&Ls simply disappeared into thin air. And if you were unlucky enough to have your mortgage with one of them, well, your loan was auctioned off to the highest bidder, usually some predatory vulture fund. And what did that fund do? They jacked up your rates, changed the rules, or just started the foreclosure process right away. So you have hundreds of thousands of families who'd been faithfully making payments to a community bank they'd known for years. And now they're getting threatening calls from some faceless collection agency halfway across the country that couldn't care less about their lives. Now get ready for the truly twisted part. A lot of these S&Ls that went under had taken people's savings and gambled a set on the very same sketchy real estate deals they were bankrolling. Let that sink in. The money in your savings account was being used to inflate the very bubble that would pop and wipe out your savings. The system was designed to self-destruct. The only reason the whole thing didn't completely implode was that housing prices on the coast just kept climbing. In essence, the booming markets in California and New York papered over the disaster in places like Texas and Arizona. The cancer wasn't removed, it just metastasized to another location. Okay, now let's jump to the main event, the big one that's still fresh in our minds. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Names like Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns, phrases like too big to fail, the Great Recession, a sea of foreclosure signs flooding every neighborhood. But I'm going to show you the part of the picture that almost everyone overlooked. The 2008 meltdown wasn't born from subprime mortgages. The real trigger was pulled back in 2004 with a seemingly dull rule change from the SEC, something called the net capital rule. What this change did was allow the big investment banks to multiply their bets, going from a leverage of 12 to 1 all the way up to 30 to 1. Read that again. And just like that, the rules changed. Banks were given the green light to play with $30 for every $1 they actually possessed. And you can guess what happened next. They started bundling all these toxic subprime home loans into financial weapons of mass destruction called CDOs. That's the fancy term for collateralized debt obligations. Then they got the ratings agencies to stamp these garbage piles with a AAA rating, and they turned around and sold them to pension funds and your retirement plan, calling them rock-solid investments. Except there was one problem. They weren't safe at all. The people on the inside knew they were worthless. And if you're looking for the smoking gun, here it is. In 2006, Goldman Sachs literally engineered a CDO that was specifically built to fail. It was given the codename Abacus 2007 AC1. They peddled it to their own clients while at the exact same time placing huge bets that it would blow up. When it did, Goldman made a fortune. Their customers were wiped out. And don't dismiss this as some wild conspiracy. This is all a matter of public record straight from testimony during Senate hearings. It's established fact. So when the whole system finally imploded in September of 2008, 8 million American families had their homes foreclosed on in the following 2 years. This wasn't because they were financially irresponsible, and it wasn't because they were dishonest on their applications. It was because the entire financial system was a house of cards built on a foundation of fraud. And this is the part that should terrify you about what's happening right now. We never actually fixed the underlying issue. We threw gasoline on the fire. The Federal Reserve slashed interest rates to nothing and then cranked up the money printers to the tune of $4.5 trillion. That tidal wave of cash had to go somewhere. And where did it end up? The real estate market, yet again. We tried to fix a crisis caused by too much debt by creating an even bigger mountain of it. The bubble didn't burst, it just swelled to a monstrous size. So now, 16 years down the road, we're all huddled under a balloon the size of a planet, and someone in the room is holding a very sharp pin. Allow me to show you precisely where we're at in this cycle of insanity. And I'm going to provide you with the exact dates and figures because this isn't guesswork. This is the documented reality they don't talk about on the news. We just completed phase 1 of the setup, which ran from 2020 to 2023. Throughout the COVID era, mortgage rates hit a floor of 2.7%. With money being practically free, home values soared by 40% nationwide in only 3 years. That $300,000 house someone purchased in January of 2020 is now supposedly worth $420,000. But let's inject a dose of reality into that picture. If you look at the Atlanta Fed's Home Ownership Affordability Monitor, the data as of November 2024 is staggering. It shows that the median family now has to dedicate 41% of their gross income just to cover the cost of a medium-priced home. Historically, that number has always been around 25%. We are currently 60% above any sustainable level. That is not a functioning market, that is a house of cards, and we're about to run out of new people at the bottom to hold it up. We are now squarely in phase 2, which I call the trap, and the warning signs are absolutely everywhere if you're paying attention. Back in March of 2024, a critical signal was triggered. The yield curve remained inverted for its 18th consecutive month. That is officially the longest such inversion in the whole of recorded financial history. And I'm about to tell you why that should send a shiver down your spine. In every single instance where the yield curve has stayed inverted for over 12 months, a major recession has hit within 18 months, 100% of the time, without fail. But that isn't even the most critical piece of the puzzle. In August of 2024, the Bank of Japan raised its interest rates for the first time in 17 years. You might be sitting there asking, why on earth should I care about Japan? You should care deeply because Japanese investors and banks are holding over $1.2 trillion of American mortgage-backed securities. The instant Japan hiked its rates, the entire carry trade strategy fell apart. Within a 72-hour window, prices for US mortgage bonds credited by 8%, which was the most rapid collapse since the 2008 crisis. The Federal Reserve was forced to conduct a stealth bailout, buying $80 billion of these assets. That's just to put a floor under the market. Let's be crystal clear, that was not a standard market operation. That was a full-blown emergency intervention, and it was barely a whisper in the financial press. Now stack this on top of everything else. As of December 2024, a massive one. $0.5 trillion in commercial real estate debt is scheduled to mature between today and the end of 2026. You're looking at ghost towers, commercial buildings left vacant because the entire workforce went remote. The loans on these properties are failing at a rate of 12%, which is 3 times what we'd ever see historically. So when these properties are inevitably sold off for 40 or 50 cents on the dollar, that massive financial loss has to go somewhere. It gets absorbed right onto the books of the very same banks that underwrite the mortgage on your home. This isn't a series of unrelated problems. It's a line of dominoes being carefully arranged. And here's the part the mainstream financial news is completely overlooking. They're glued to the Federal Reserve's next move. They're obsessed with unemployment figures. They're analysing inflation reports, but they are all looking in the wrong direction. The real time bomb is ticking away inside the derivatives market, and practically no one is even glancing at it. At this very moment, spare banks are sitting on $210 trillion worth of derivative exposure. Let me frame that for you. That figure is 8 times the size of the entire United States economy. The bulk of this exposure comes from interest rate swaps and credit default swaps, all linked to real estate debt. You can think of these derivatives as a web of financial insurance policies. Bank A has a deal to pay Bank B if a specific event happens. In turn, Bank B has a promise to pay Bank C, and Bank C has a contract to pay Bank A. It's a massive interconnected circle of IOUs, and the system is flawless provided everybody stays solvent. But the instant a single link in that chain snaps, the whole structure detonates. Cast your mind back to Lehman Brothers during the 2008 crisis. It wasn't their bad mortgage portfolio that took Lehman down. The firm imploded because the rest of the street suddenly refused to do business with them. The killer was counterparty risk. The moment other financial institutions lost faith in Lehman's ability to cover its bets, all their funding evaporated overnight. On November the 14th, 2024, Deutsche Bank reported a $1.2 billion loss tied to their real estate derivatives. This wasn't a catastrophic default, merely a significant loss. But that's how it starts, the first hairline fracture appearing in the dam. Now here is the scenario that follows. The moment a single major bank can't meet a margin call on one of these derivative contracts, the entire system will lock up. Lending between banks will cease and all trading will halt. Every institution will start stockpiling cash. The credit markets will completely seize like an engine that's been drained of all its oil. And the second credit locks down the housing market, goes into cardiac arrest. This happens because 90% of all home sales depend on the buyer getting a mortgage. A freezing credit means the pool of buyers evaporates. A lack of buyers sends home prices into a nosedive. The Federal Reserve is fully aware of this nightmare scenario. That is precisely the reason they've already taken on $2.3 trillion of toxic mortgage-backed securities just this year. They are desperately trying to position themselves as the ultimate buyer to stop the chain reaction before it begins. The problem is they don't have enough firepower to buy it all. The scale of the market is just too vast. The amount of leverage involved is simply too great, and every single player inside the financial system is acutely aware of that fact. Let me lay out the entire timeline for you. Here's the exact chain reaction. The first domino topples in Q1 2025 as commercial real estate defaults start to spiral. This won't be the Wall Street giants you've heard of. The first casualties are the mid-level banks, the lenders in places like Phoenix, Nashville and Boise. They're the ones who will start to buckle. The second that first one collapses, a wave of fear hits the depositors. And forget those black and white pictures of bank runs from the history books. You're not going to see any desperate crowds lined up down the street. The modern bank run is just the glow of a smartphone screen at 2 a.m. as people drain their accounts with a single tap. The second domino falls in Q2 2025. That's when we see a massive spike in people defaulting on their credit cards. Consider this: back in October 2024, the total credit card debt load swelled past $1.13 trillion, and the share of people falling behind on their payments climbed to 3.1%, the highest that number has been since 2011. And here's a secret of personal finance: when the credit cards go unpaid, the mortgage payment is always the next to be missed. It is as predictable as clockwork. The third domino tips over in Q3 2025. This is the moment the forced selling kicks into high gear. Think about all the people who bought at the absolute peak in 2021 and 2022, putting down just 3%. They have zero equity to protect them. A mere 10% dip in home values is all it takes to plunge them underwater on their loans. At that point, strategically defaulting and just walking away from the property becomes the only logical move. Suddenly the market is swamped with foreclosures. The fourth domino begins its fall in the final quarter of 2025, or possibly the first quarter of 2026. This is the cascade event. Prices plummet by 20 to 30% across the board, and even more rapidly in those superheated markets like Austin and Phoenix and Boise. Now the banks holding these loans are forced to revalue them at their new much lower market price. This completely hides their legally required capital cushions. The entire system locks up, credit completely dries up overnight. You need to sell your house, there's nobody left to buy it. You need to refinance your loan, there are no loans available. You need to tap into your home's equity. Sorry, there's no equity left to tap. And that is the moment when 40 million homeowners will wake up to the nightmare realization that they are completely trapped. They're holding on to an asset that they can no longer sell, can no longer refinance, and can no longer afford. Right about now, I know exactly what you're probably thinking. You're telling yourself, okay, sure, but things are different this time, because let me just stop you right there. Every single financial collapse in the history of the world was preceded by someone saying that exact phrase, "This time is different." Those are the four most costly words in the world of finance. You're probably thinking about how the banks are supposedly safer now after the 2008 crisis. You'll point to the Dodd-Frank Act. You'll mention the stress tests and the higher capital requirements, and on paper all of that is true. But remember, Silicon Valley Bank sailed through its stress test just 1 month before it utterly imploded in 48 hours back in March of 2023. And then Signature Bank went under. And then First Republic collapsed. In just 2 months, we've watched 3 massive banks completely implode. The problem isn't that the regulations are broken. They were never designed for the velocity of the modern world. Today, capital zips around the globe with a single click. Relying on rules from the 1930s is like trying to fight a drone with a musket. And here's the real secret: those outdated rules don't even touch the major players like hedge funds or private equity. They completely ignore the shadow banking world, a behemoth controlling $52 trillion in assets, which is double the entire traditional banking system. The systemic risk from 2008 never actually evaporated. It simply shifted into the dark corners of the market, completely off the regulator's radar. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, but people have more equity now. It's not like the subprime mess in 2008. And while the average homeowner does have more equity, that statistic hides a dangerous truth. A staggering 63% of mortgages originated since 2020 went to first-time buyers. These are people who jumped into the market at its absolute peak with tiny down payments facilitated by FHA loans. If the market just dips 15%, their entire investment gets wiped out, and that's a ticking time bomb affecting 28 million households. On top of this, though, corporate investors have exploded their ownership of single-family homes from just 2% in 2019 to 7% today. Don't mistake them for regular homeowners. They're fiduciaries with a legal duty to protect their investors' capital. So when the market starts to slide, they don't hold on and hope for the best. They dump properties all at once, which turns a small correction into a full-blown avalanche. And then there's the final objection I always hear: the government will just step in and save everyone again. Are you so sure about that? Let's run the numbers. Back in 2008, the rescue package involved a $700 billion TARP program, plus the Fed creating $4.5 trillion to buy up assets.
As
The
you can
grand
see on the
total for
graph,
that
the
rescue
interest
was roughly
payments alone keep us
$5.2
trapped.
trillion. Fast forward to today, the residential mortgage market alone is $12 trillion, with commercial real estate adding another $5 trillion. Once you factor in credit cards, auto loans and student debt, we are staring down the barrel of a financial meltdown twice as severe as 2008. The Fed's balance sheet is already bloated to over $7.04 trillion. The country is buried under a $36 trillion national debt. We're adding $2 trillion to that debt pile every single year. The political appetite for another multi-trillion-dollar rescue, especially to save wealthy homeowners, is completely non-existent. This time firing up the money printer would force a terrible choice, either detonate the dollar or ignite a political uprising. The reality is, they would likely get both. So for anyone telling you this time is different, they're dead wrong. In fact, this time is shaping up to be far worse. Let me boil this entire pattern down to a single simple rule. Asset bubbles inflated by debt always burst the moment the cost of paying the loan becomes greater than the income the asset generates. And that's exactly where we are right now. So the critical question is, how do you protect yourself? First, you must determine your actual loan-to-value ratio, and I don't mean the fantasy number Zillow shows you. Ask what your home would genuinely fetch if you listed it tomorrow and had to have cash in hand within 30 days. Be brutally honest. Now take that number and slash another 10% off, because you have to account for the fact that prices are heading down, not up. If your loan-to-value is over 80% after that math, you're officially on thin ice. If it's north of 90%, you're clutching a ticking time bomb. Second, you need to start stockpiling liquid reserves immediately. Your goal is 12 full months of living expenses and accessible money, not volatile stocks, not crypto, and definitely not theoretical home equity. I mean actual cash. Park that cash in a high-yield savings account where you can earn somewhere between 4 and 5%. Treasury bills are another smart, safe place for it. It's about being prudent and staying afloat. The objective isn't to strike it rich. It's about having a lifeline when the credit system seizes up and every door closes. Number 3, put your income through a fire drill. If you got a pink slip tomorrow, how many months of mortgage payments could you actually cover? If the answer is fewer than 6, you're looking at 3 paths forward. Earn more money, cut your spending to the bone, or get out of the property before the tide turns against you. I realise how drastic that sounds. That's the point. 4th on the list, if you plan on keeping your home for the long haul, secure a home equity line of credit. Now, while you're still approved regardless of if you need the funds, possessing an available credit line before the banks slam the vault shut gives you leverage when everyone else is powerless. And number 5, for those who are financially solid with cash on hand, get ready to seize the coming opportunity. This kind of domino effect creates once-in-a-generation buying moments. But that only works if you're holding cash while everyone else is being forced into a fire sale. I'm not telling you to blow up your life trying to perfectly predict a market crash. I'm telling you not to be the one left without a chair when the party ends.
Vigilance.
This exact cycle has played out through history across different nations and with different currencies. The tools and platforms are new. The buzzwords and jargon are updated. But the core of human behavior, the greed, the delusion, the sheer panic that never changes. Back in 1929, experts swore the market had found a permanently high plateau. In 2006, the mantra was that real estate values could only go up. Here in 2024, the belief is that the Federal Reserve will always step in to save us. The Fed is not on your side. They are on the side of the financial system itself. And if preserving that system means sacrificing your home, that is a deal they will make in a nanosecond every single time. 40 million homeowners won't be wiped out by some random stroke of bad luck. They will be wiped out because the fundamental arithmetic of the situation requires it. The over-leveraging has to be corrected. The mountain of debt has to be brought down. And if you find yourself on the losing end of that calculation when it all unravels, no amount of positive thinking is going to help you. The chain reaction has already begun. The dominoes are already falling. The only thing left to determine is if you're standing in their way. Join me for part 2, where I'll break down the 3 specific housing markets that are set to crack first. I'll show you the one signal from the banks that tells you the real collapse is starting. And I'll reveal the one type of asset that actually skyrockets in value as the housing market implodes. Make sure you subscribe. Turn on your notification, because once this thing starts, it will move with blinding speed. And the critical information you'll need won't show up on the nightly news until it's far too late to act. In any major downturn, wealth isn't actually lost. It is simply transferred. It moves from the people who are unprepared to those who are ready. Make sure you're not on the giving end of that transfer.